got from the last session? Amen. You got the point though, right? Fructose is what? Poison. Clogs up the system, jams up the running of the human machinery, and causes diabetes, high blood pressure, heart attack, strokes, obesity, fatty liver, okay? Which is worse? Granulated cane juice or fructose, high fructose corn syrup? They're the same, yeah, same thing. Okay, now we're going to take a look at a totally different aspect of sugar and what it does to the body. And we're going to talk about something you may not be aware of, and that is the glycocalyx. How many of you have heard of glycocalyx? Yeah. This is a picture of a glycocalyx. A glycocalyx lines every capillary in every artery in your body. Now, usually when we draw a picture of an artery, we draw the endothelium as that inner layer, the endothelial cells, these nice smooth layer cells we talk about there. And then underneath that is the layer where the subendothelium where plaque can develop. And underneath that is a muscle layer. And then outside of there, there's a tough connective tissue that holds it together and gives it strength. Well, this is inside the endothelial layer. And the glycocalyx, which you see pictured here, that structure right there, these are special photographs. Here's a real magnified picture of it. This layer right here is the endothelial cells, and then there's this glycocalyx extending inside the lumen of the blood vessel. And it has a lot of fantastically important functions. And what is it made out of? It's made out of protein. Each of these little strands you see here is like a single strand of protein coming up, and it's covered with sugar molecules of all different kinds. Yeah, that's why it's called glycoprotein, or sometimes they're referred to as proteoglycans. Now, it forms right off of the cell surface, and I'm going to draw in here not the endothelial cell, but just the cell membrane on the edge of it right here. It's the cell membrane of every cell is what we call a bilipid membrane. There's these fatty molecules with polar heads, and they kind of stick together, making this double layer. They've got their heads up here, and then down in here, and all of this stuff going in between. And that makes up the membrane. Actually, that's too big. I'm going to draw the membrane along here. On the bottom of the picture is inside of the endothelial cell. And of course, in this picture, the endothelial cell is this little layer right here. And so we're going to draw the membrane across here. So this is just the membrane. This is inside the cell. And the glycocalyx is manufactured inside the cell. There's these structures called endoplasmic reticulum. These are the locations or the spaces where we build many of the things that cells build. And the glycocalyx is built in there. And there's built up these proteins, and then there's these big, long protein chains that stick out of the protein. And once it makes a whole bunch of this glycoprotein, it moves it to the surface. And it comes up, and the surface of this endoplasmic reticulum actually blends with and becomes part of the cell membrane. And it has in it then, as it inverts, these pieces of glycocalyx. And they're proteins that actually embed through the membrane here. So there's protein molecules that extend through the membrane, and these protein molecules have these long tails that come out here. A whole bunch of them coming out of each one, sort of like your lawn growing. Lots of grass out there. And each of these is a chain of amino acids attached to this. And by the way, these also have things that attach to other structures inside the cell and have functions down here. But each one of these long chains, if you really magnified it, is like an amino acid chain. That's what proteins are, all stuck together in this big long chain. And then on the sides are like side chains of carbohydrates, of sugar molecules all stuck together in chains. Now, so far we've talked about sugar. We've talked about two simple sugars. What are they? Glucose and fructose. How many sugars are there actually? Over 200. There are over 200 different kinds of sugars. At least 8 of those 200 are what we call essential sugars, meaning your body can't make them. They have to come in from outside. So in order to build these, we need lots of different sugars. Now, if the sugar in your diet is coming from sucrose or high fructose corn syrup, how many sugars are you getting? Well, where are you going to get those hundreds of other sugars from? Where would you find them? In fruits and vegetables. The food as God made it is extremely complex. There is dozens of different sugars in every different piece of fruit or vegetable, the peppers, the squash, they all have these different sugars built in them in different places, and different ones have different ones. And as you eat a variety of fruits and vegetables, you're getting hundreds of different sugars every day, if that's what your diet is made of. Now, if your diet is, is getting this way and just minimal of the actual whole fruit, then you're going to have a problem. There is a vitamin country, a supplement company that makes what they call glyconutrients. And they take a bunch of these different sugars and they package them, make them in a powder or make them into little vitamin pills, and they give them to people. And guess what? Wow, they get amazing results because people are taking all these glyconutrients. Why do they get such amazing results? Because everybody in their country is major deficient. They're deficient of all of these glyconutrients, these hundreds of other different things. However, if the only sugar that came into your body came every time you were eating a plum or a nectarine or a cherry or an apple, mangoes, you're going down the list right here. What sugars are your body made out of? It's got all of these different sugars in there in all of these different amounts, and the body does its own adjustments of them and making of it. And we have all the stuff we need to build a nice, healthy membrane here. So we're just going to draw this membrane in here because we really need this for the rest of our picture here. We're going to draw another masterpiece here. We have less time, though. They've shortened our time here, so we're going to have to make this all fit here. But this membrane, so in these pictures here and here, you're seeing all of these backbones here of the membrane. We'll just abbreviate it there. But actually, there are then attached all of these sugars all over it here, and these little chains coming off. So we actually end up with, there's almost like a surface here, a jelly-like surface on the membrane here, which you can't really see in these particular pictures. There's a different type of photograph, I don't have one here for you, where you can actually see all the glycogen still, the different glyconutrients all on there. And you can actually see this like jelly-like layer out here. It's almost like a smooth jelly-like layer. And as the blood flows through the blood vessel here, the blood cells are going by here, and the different parts of the white blood cells, the red blood cell, we'll draw a red blood cell. And by here, and we'll put over here a different color here, here's a monocyte coming by here. All of these cells, the cells just stay outside of this. They don't penetrate through this layer right here. And all of the blood proteins, all of the clotting proteins and antibodies, all of the other proteins, they also stay in this luminal space right here. They do not penetrate through there. This is really a penetration barrier. Now, small molecules like sodium or potassium, or small like sugars and amino acids, they can pass right through this layer and on into the cell. But large protein molecules can't actually touch or pass through this layer right here. And you can actually take pictures of blood flowing through the cells, and if you put a special dye that stains all the proteins and cells, you can see them. They never touch the edge of the cell. It just flows along in this nice jelly-like layer that coats every artery and even down to the capillary level. This right here is a capillary right here, a single capillary, so there's not even a muscle layer out there. These are the cell where it comes through your body and everything is being absorbed out here. But all of the proteins and blood cells are kept inside by this nice glycocalyx that covers it there. Now, as it moves along, this whole thing right here, these things right here, they actually kind of wave and move. Have you ever watched seaweed in the surf, how it's kind of doing this kind of thing? Or have you watched grass on the side of a hillside when the wind's blowing? You kind of see that? Well, that's what this stuff does. It's moving all the time like this within its jelly layer. It's moving like this. And these protein cells that attach to it actually have what they call shear stress detectors. In other words, they can detect that movement. And they actually, by sensing the amount of movement, because remember, your blood is going through your arteries how? It's not like water in a water pipe, constant flowing. Your heart's beating like this, right? And so what's happening? There's a pulse. I mean, you can feel your pulse. It goes, and as it's pulsing along with each wave, they're doing this. Well, God harnessed that motion and is using it for several really important functions. One of the functions is this movement of the glycocalyx actually determines how much big this layer is. In the areas where there's a lot of shear force, in other words, the amount of force pushing it this way is a lot, what happens is it will build a thicker glycocalyx. And in areas where there's less, it builds a thinner one. As a matter of fact, there's some areas like in the with the bulb of the like carotid place where there's sort of turbulence such that there's a fairly low pressure, and it actually gets a much thinner layer in those areas. And interestingly, those are the areas where you can start getting problems, plaque and stuff. We'll get to where that comes from. But anyway, so this shear stress actually determines, it's sort of a stimulus for the growth. You know, there's a lot of things in the body that work this way. Exercise, weight-bearing exercise is a stimulus creating a piezoelectric effect that actually makes your bones lay down stronger, harder, more dense bone. You know, each type of use does something that causes, isn't it amazing how God designed this? The farther you get in, the more complexly wonderful it is. But anyway, this glycocalyx, as each pulse is going by, these things are sensing it, and it's sort of a stimulus to growth. And so they grow as they're stimulated there. But there is another really important thing that they do. Remember in the last lecture we talked about nitric oxide? And what makes nitric oxide? Remember? Remember this protein? It's an enzyme. Nitric oxide synthase, okay? It's synthesizing nitric oxide. And so it's making the nitric oxide, which is then made inside the cell. It's absorbing out of the cell and down to the muscle layers of the cell, causing relaxation of the artery. Well, this is coupled to these. And with its coupling, what it's doing is every time there is this waving motion, it's pumping it, it's stimulating it, it's basically turning it on. It's a stimulus to make nitric oxide. So with each pulse of your blood, it's making this. And of course, if it's stronger and harder and really pumping hard, it's really making out a lot, relaxing it, getting the artery nice and open so you can pass a lot of blood through there. So again, another very nice arrangement that was designed in there. There's another protein that we find located, it actually is made in the blood, but it comes and it attaches and embeds itself right here in the surface of the glycocalyx. Superoxide dismutase. Superoxide dismutase. And what is it? What is superoxide? Superoxide is a damaging oxygen molecule that is very reactive. We talked about free radicals and oxidative damage. We talked about free radical damage to fats and to proteins and different things. We've talked about that in a lot of times of places we realize it's one of the major things that's driving the inflammatory processes in arteriosclerosis as the body's trying to clean up this stuff. Well, anytime there is something bad, we mentioned in the last time about the fructose, God always packages the antidote. We make superoxide inside mitochondria as we're making energy. And so God put a whole bunch of one type of these actually inside mitochondria to catch up all that, to clean it up so the oxygen isn't free to damage other structures in the cell. But there's also some in cytoplasm of the cell. But God made a special supply of it here, and we find these attached all along the Glycocalyx surface. And so if there is any oxidative stuff out in here, different particles with oxidative, you know, these free oxygen things, this right here, it has a special copper atom in there, and some of them are made with manganese, and there's different, you know, metal ions in there that can change between different electrical states and flip back and forth. They call it this dismutase, or it can just flip back and forth, and as it flips back and forth, it destroys these. And as it flips back and forth, it's a reusable. It can destroy another one, destroy another one. It continues and keeps working. It's an amazing little tool to get rid of these bad oxygen things so they don't damage us. The same type of thing that we do with antioxidant molecules. Well, the superoxide dismutase is really you might say, a super antioxidant. It is a very powerful tool that carries on antioxidant activity for it. And it's lining all of this layer, protecting us from oxidative things out here that might be going on really bad. Okay, let's see. The next thing we'll talk about is the role in anticoagulation. You know, one of the important things about blood is that it has the ability to clot so that you don't bleed to death if you get an injury, because if you got an injury and lost your blood, that would be very serious. And so God's made a lot of things to protect you about that, and your ability of your blood to clot is one of those. But we don't want the blood to clot inside the blood vessels where we need it to be nice and liquid and flowing along. And so this clotting mechanism is actually extremely complex process, multiple different proteins, multiple different steps of regulation. There's proteins that can turn into clot, and there's proteins that can keep it from clotting. And they're sort of in balance, sort of a self-regulatory system, so it's always ready to clot, but never clotting. And one of the things we'll find here, there is a substance called antithrombin, one of those proteins, and it actually comes and embeds itself down here in the glycocalyx. So we'll just call this here antithrombin. Antithrombin. So if anything should, again, preventing a clot from forming on the surface here. Clots often form on surface, but because the antithrombin is in here, if one should try to stop, this immediately is blocking and inhibiting it. Another one here. And this one had a complex name. Tissue factor pathway inhibitor. Tissue factor pathway inhibitor. You know, there's different clotting pathways, chain reactions of these things to cause a clot, and one of them is called tissue factor pathway, and this is actually an inhibitor, so if something's doing in tissue, this will inhibit that particular form of clotting. This sort of prevents the forming of thrombin, which is part of the thing that makes your thrombus or your clot right there. And so these things, again, being embedded in the surface, protect a clot from forming on this surface right here. Another one, there's one called von Willebrand's factor. Ever heard of von Willebrand's disease? It's where they can't make this properly. It's defective. Von Willebrand factor. is another one of those right there. And these are all helping to prevent the clot type thing from forming there. This von Willebrand's factor is actually not so much part of these two clotting chains, but is part of another system. Have you all heard of platelets? Do you know what platelets are? They're little teeny things. They're smaller than a whole cell, but they're sort of like little cell-like things. They don't have a nucleus, but they're little things that float around in the blood, and they have the ability to help us control. So I'll just draw a couple of platelets passing by here. Now, platelets are normal, nice and smooth and float around, but if you get a cut or something, and we get exposed to this guy, this von Willebrand's factor, in other words, if we should cut this artery, expose this von Willebrand's factor right here, it could activate these and start to make a platelet plug to plug up the hole and start the clotting thing. So this is in here, attached down to the surface, protected where it doesn't touch those, but it's down here associated with the Glycocalyx and with the plasma membrane down there. Again, part of the amazing stuff right there. There's also a role in what we call leukocyte adhesion, and these white blood cells that float around in our blood. What is the purpose of a white blood cell? To attack disease, bacteria, viruses, bad proteins, things that aren't supposed to be there, clean up damaged debris, junk, whatever. They get rid of they get rid of bad stuff for us. And they float around here in the blood. Now, if there's an inflammation or infection, they actually come attached to the surface of the vessel, pass right through between the endothelium. A really neat process. They call it diapedesis. This whole thing just deforms, slides through a little crack and forms on the other side. It's amazing, way that cell can just sort of slide through this thing and kind of reform on the other side. It's very, very flexible in its structure, and it's like an amoeba. It sends out these pseudopods, actually moves and crawls around, and it goes to wherever the bad stuff is and gobbles it up. And there's those floating around here, but you don't want them activated and going all over the place if you don't have a need for them. Now, in order to get through the membrane, there's actually some special little attachment structures here. There's two different kinds of them. There's some that reach out and grab it, and then there's some that actually activate it to come through. DICAM and VCAM, but don't worry about that, right? But anyway, like in septic shock, this will peel away, and this can actually attach right here, in an inflammatory thing. And these first ones attach, it sort of catches it, it sort of helps it roll along and slow down, and once it attaches to these deeper ones, it actually transforms, changes, passes through, goes right through between a couple of endothelial cells and out into the tissue on the other side and starts moving around and carrying on its process. But these are all nicely embedded underneath, inside this glycocalyx, so they're not exposed. So in a normal situation, the blood's flowing along, it does not attach here, it does not go out there. These just stay floating around, patrolling, waiting till they're needed. They don't start going out and carrying inflammation in the tissues where we don't want them. In the formation of arteriosclerotic plaque out in the artery, well, this is a capillary, but out in an artery here, we've often talked about LDL, the oxidized LDL, that bad stuff. You get all this bad oxidized, they're the smaller ones, they're not the big healthy ones, and those are the ones that can actually pass through the endothelium into that space, and then the cells are reacting against them to do bad things. Well, all of that oxidized LDL out here, let me put some of those out here, LDLs. They are large, and they're excluded. They're out here, so they can't get through down here and cause a problem. They float around out there. The same with the AGEs. If there was some AGEs, they also would be out here, floating around out here. They're big molecules. They're not going to pass through and come down into the area there where they could be damaged. So there you've got a lot of really nice things that we know about the glycocalyx so far. This nice mucousy-like layer that's here. By the way, the endothelium is not the only thing that makes a glycocalyx. God actually uses similar type structures. There's actually a glycocalyx that lines your intestinal. All of your intestini villi and the microvilli, they actually have a glycocalyx too. But it doesn't do all this stuff. It's got a whole different set of stuff that it does that actually helps in digestion. And actually the sucrase enzyme, the enzyme that cuts this up, it's in the glycocalyx of your digestive tract. So before any sugar can get in your digestive system, hits the sucrase and separates the glucose and fructose. So that's another place it's used. We find it a lot of different places. Have you ever touched a fish? Yeah. Why they're all slimy and smooth? That's a glycocalyx. Its cells on its surface make a glycocalyx. These protein chains with all of these different sugars attached make a glycocalyx. So this is really specifically endothelial glycocalyx. It's a specific glycocalyx made on endothelial cells that line every artery of your body, keep the blood flowing, smoothing through. Nothing's touching here. Things are not soaking through and penetrating that shouldn't. All proteins stay out here, LDLs, AGEs, all of this stuff. Everything works great. And the bad news is there's things we can do that will destroy the glycocalyx. Here is a nice healthy glycocalyx, and over here is a picture of a glycocalyx that's badly damaged. And actually the damage is worse than you can see here because this picture is actually more magnified. If you look at this endothelial layer right here, the endothelial cells, see how much wider it is here? So if you shrunk down the magnification so these both match, the amount of little glycocalyx was even smaller in comparison. It's just minimal little stuff. This glycocalyx should be going out to here with big long strands, and it's mucousy-like with all of its sugars out here forming a nice protective layer. But it's all been stripped away and gone, exposing the underlying endothelial cell. What destroys glycocalyxes? We find destroyed glycocalyxes in a number of disease processes. In septic shock, we find the glycocalyx is destroyed and all kinds of major inflammation stuff is going on. Actually, diabetics have a glycocalyx that looks like that. Their glycocalyx is all wiped out. Many disease processes we find bad glycocalyxes. What is it that makes the glycocalyx be destroyed? Interestingly, what we find is the things that destroy the glycocalyx are the things that are major risk factors for arteriosclerosis or artery disease. Smoking destroys a glycocalyx. If you're a smoker, your glycocalyx looks like that. Totally unprotecting, non-functional. A high-fat diet, if you're eating a lot of greasy, oxidized, fatty foods, all these different French fries, fried this, fried that, they will do that. But one of the big culprits, and we're going to spend our time talking about here because we're on the topic of sugar, is hyperglycemia. If your blood sugar is high, it wipes out the glycocalyx. Diabetics whose sugars are running high, out of control, they look like this. Now, what about the rest of us that are not diabetics? Well, one of the reasons that sugar is such a bad thing causing so many problems, sugar directly correlates with heart disease and arteriosclerosis and heart attacks and strokes just as much as it correlates with some of the stuff we talked about here earlier today. Is what happens when you drink a big soda or eat a big piece of chocolate cake or some big pastry or whatever, and you get a big load of sugar. Well, now these are simple sugars. They're refined sugars, high fructose corn syrup or simple cane sugar. And so what happens when they hit the stomach and the intestines? They're immediately absorbed into your bloodstream. There's no fiber associated with them. They're in high amounts. And what happens to your blood sugar level? It just shoots way up. You've got this huge amount of sugar rushing through your blood. Now, if you're not a diabetic and your body is putting out a whole bunch of insulin along with this, of course it's raising your insulin levels, but if it's putting a lot of insulin along this, your body's going to start taking that into cells and it's going to come down. But, you know, an hour or two after a meal, it's going to be peaked out up here, and then gradually it's going to come back down to a normal level. And at meals it peaks up and goes down like this. And these hypoglycemic peaks along here are destroying glycocalyx. And so if we're on a high sugar diet, drinking sodas regular, eating candies, cakes, cookies and stuff, we're damaging and tearing up our glycocalyx, just like as if we were smoking and tearing up our glycocalyx. So what happens when our glycocalyx is all messed up like that? Well, let's kind of go through and just think about some of the things we've talked about here. First of all, the oxidation, the superoxide, or SOD here, where's it? Well, the glycocalyx, matter of fact, let's draw in this damaged glycocalyx here. There's a little bit here, and then there's something here, maybe a few things there. But that nice glycocalyx, all of this mucousy stuff, there's no mucus, you know, the carbohydrate stuff there. Maybe there's a little teeny spot of it there or something, you know. But it's like somebody went through with a weed eater and just cleaned it all out. And by the way, you take that big dose of sugar and wipe this out, you know what you find? All this stuff you cut off is floating around in your blood. Yeah, you can measure the blood, and what you find is all of this is in little chunks floating around in the blood. It just like a weed eater went through and chopped it off, and it's all floating around in the blood out there. Eventually something will, God has all these little things that go around and clean up, and the macrophages have tried to clean it up and get rid of it, but basically it's not a healthy situation here. So our SOD, it floated away, it's gone, so we don't have this protective. So oxygen, damaged oxygen, if there's something in the blood, it can go right through the membrane and start affecting the endothelium there. So there's our first problem there. Now what about our NOS, our nitric oxide synthase? Remember how it was linked to the pulsations of the glycocalyx? So what's happened now? There's no attached glycocalyx pulsating. And so what is it doing? It just shuts down and quits making. Yeah. And of course, the ones that were stimulating the making of more glycocalyx, since there's nothing here stimulating them, it's not really repairing it like it should. And so even though we only had one really bad drink and then we're eating good the rest of the day, well, we wiped out the glycocalyx and the stimulation to repair it isn't there. It's going to be quite a while until something gets around to fix that and repair that there. So it kind of extends the damage. So if we don't have this functioning, it's not making nitric oxide. So what disease process does that cause? Hypertension. Remember, we talked about it here. We talked about how uric acid came and blocked this. So uric acid blocks this. But we not only have the uric acid from all the sugar blocking this, now we've wiped out the glycocalyx and it's not making it. So do you see why there's a direct correlation with the amount of sugar you take and how high your blood pressure is? See the problem? Okay. So there we go with that one. What about, let's see, what's next here? Okay. Remember these LDLs out here that couldn't touch this? The oxidized LDLs, now what? They can come right down here to the surface. They can pass right through. Move on down. They can go out even on the other side of the endothelium there. And so now we're getting oxidized LDLs out here. And what else? Remember the AGEs? Yeah, the AGGs out here. Well, they also can just come down to the membrane here and come right through. So now we've got LDLs and AGEs coming down here. Bad things. And of course we have an immune system to take care of that, to try to clean up these debris. But now, because they're not out in the blood, where's it going to have to go to get them? Down here in this subendothelial space where they're all accumulating. Remember these little things here for attaching and controlling these so they can come through? Well, let's look at them here. And what happens is the blood is flowing along and these cells are moving along. These like little arms waving up there and touching it. The cell actually comes along and it actually touches. These arms are like sticky. It's sort of like Velcro. You know, this isn't just one spot here. It's all along the vessel. And when it comes along, this moving along at high speed, it suddenly sticks and it starts slowing down, and you can actually see this cell sort of like tumbling and rolling. It's sort of a weak attachment. It kind of sticks and kind of rolls and sticks and rolls and sticks. And as it's doing this rolling stick thing, what's happening to its velocity? It's going slower and slower and slower as it kind of tumbles and rolls along the edge here. Now, normally with a glycocalyx, it's just flowing on by, no problem. But now, it's just like Velcro. It's sticking to all this stuff as it rolls along. And as it comes farther, it will stick to these little guys here. And when it sticks to these, it can't stick to them when it's moving fast, but once these guys slow it down, it sticks to these. They not only stick to it, but it activates it. And when it activates it, it changes form, and it actually starts going, this diapedesis passes through the membrane and forms out on the other side of your endothelial cells, moves right on through. And of course, down here, these cells now start carrying on phagocytosis, trying to get all of this LDL and AGEs and try to gobble them up. And as they gobble them up, there's so much down there, they start just swelling up with all of this bad oxidized fat and glycated proteins and all of this junk. And what are they doing? They just turn, they swell up and they turn into giant foam cells. They call them that because when the scientists look through the microscope, they see these big cells that look like they're just full of foam. So I'll just draw one of those here. They're just full of all this debris. They're just giant garbage collectors, and they're just swollen up over full because there was so much. Again, why is this stuff here? Because too much sugar and too much oxidized fat in the diet. So all of that, you know, soda and French fries and stuff is now all embedded down in here, and these guys are all attacking, trying to clean it up. But of course, meal after meal, day after day, we keep eating sugar and fried foods, and as we eat sugar and fried foods, this process continues, and we just start building up battlefield debris down here. And that is the process of arteriosclerosis. The hardening of the arteries, the building up these plaques, which will eventually lead to heart attacks and strokes. So now do you see how high sugar, fat, smoking contribute directly to this arteriosclerotic process, which of course is the #1 cause of death in this country. Heart attacks are still #1. More likely to die of a heart attack than anything else here, and this is the reason right here. Now, remember the platelets there? Use my hand here. The HDLs are totally, HDL is part of the recovery process. These big foam cells, these things, all this bad fat they collected, they repackage it in HDLs, and the HDLs are released. HDLs go to the liver. When they get to the liver, there's a special little loading. Remember I said the liver did a lot of things? They unload and then unload into the liver cell, and the liver actually processes them, puts them out in the bile. The bile comes out through the gallbladder into the digestive tract, passes through the digestive tract, particularly if you're on a high fiber diet, gets absorbed into the fiber and passes out of the body. So that's sort of how you clean up a plaque. Yeah, is you have the HDL is cleaning it up. But in this case right here, it's a losing battle because there's so much bad stuff coming. There's way more of the bad stuff coming in than we're shipping out. So if there's lots of LDL and a little bit of HDL, what do we say? That's a bad ratio, right? Because we're putting a lot in and we're only getting a little out. We kind of like it the other way, we'd like a lot on the way out, so we're cleaning up the arteries. Of course, the only way to do that is to change the diet on how much we're putting in here. Once we change that, then we can put out more and get rid of it. Okay, remember these little platelets out here? Remember this von Willebrand's factor here? It's on the surface right here. Well, the platelets can come down, and von Willebrand's factor activates a platelet. Well, these little things that were floating around, when they get activated, they totally change. They send out these like pseudopods. They're like things like, draw one here for you. They're like the platelet here, but it sends out all these like little arms like this. And these arms turn super sticky. And they stick to the endothelium, they stick to these factors, and they release little factors that activate other platelets. And so another platelet comes along, and when it gets activated, it turns sticky. And another one here, and it goes sticky. And then another one comes along, and it's releasing more of these factors, and it's getting sticky. Now, ideally, see, this von Willebrand's factor would have been exposed when you got a cut. And so you cut open the blood vessel, you split it open, and some platelets started sticking on the von Willebrand's, and so what do? They go sticky. And the ones around them go sticky, and they make this big platelet plug, which can then help to plug up the cut and seal it. You put a little pressure on it, hold it there for a minute, and what happens? Pretty soon it stops bleeding, right? Because the platelet plug, they all went sticky on that von Willebrand's factor, and they plugged up that hole. But of course, this isn't a cut here. This is an important artery we need blood flowing through. But what are we doing now? Every platelet that's come by is kind of getting stuck and added on here, and they're touching more, and more are coming, and they're just all of these bad things going on here. And then we're getting this platelet plug here. And particularly, if we start to build up a calcified plaque, those really thick cholesterol calcified plaques, they can even start cracking and breaking the membranes of the endothelium here, making it even more susceptible to start forming the platelet plug. But another thing that happens, these little factors it's released, they not only activate platelets, they also activate these clotting proteins out here. Fibrinogen turns into fibrin, all of these big long, and what that is, you start getting these big long chains of fibrin forming out here in the blood. Now, and of course, your red blood cells get stuck in the fibrin. And now what are we doing? We're making a blood clot here. Yeah, the platelet plugs started, and now we've got a blood clot forming. Well, now, if you just got a cut and you're trying to stop the bleeding, that's a nice thing to do because the platelets plug, you get the blood clot, and the bleeding stops so you don't keep losing blood. But this is an important artery. And what we have done here, by forming this blood clot in the artery, what's that doing to the blood flow now? We just blocked it off. Well, what if this artery was one of your coronary arteries in your heart? What just happened? You just went from normal to severe chest pain, short of breath, very nauseated. You rush to the ER, and I look at my EKG, and I'm going to say, oh man, a big ST elevation MI. Yeah, you're having a heart attack. Of course, in the ER, what am I going to do for you? We're going to try to rush you into a cath lab. We've actually got some of these factors that, prevent clots and dissolve clots. We're going to inject those in there and try to dissolve that for you. And if we get it soon enough and quick enough, we can dissolve it and dissolve this blood clot before the heart muscle dies there. Now what about, remember our TFPI and our antithrombin? Remember they were down here to prevent a blood clot? Where are they? Well, when we lost the Glycocalyx, we lost them too. Yeah. Yeah. So they're all gone too. So we lost all of our protective stuff here, and now we've got this very vulnerable membrane, very easy to make clots on. We've got the inflammatory stuff going under here. Do you see how sugar is really contributing to a major problem there. That falls in the big category of what we call macrovascular disease. Basically, we build up an atherosclerotic plaque around arteries, and then we can also build blood clots or thrombin inside the artery. That results in heart attacks, results in strokes, peripheral artery disease, where you start losing the blood vessels, claudication to the legs, or even end up, particularly diabetics, which run just hyperglycemia all the time. The number one cause of amputations is what? Diabetes. Yeah.
Sweet and low, where's that from?
Artificial sweeteners. They don't do this. But they do a lot of other bad things. We got a few minutes left. Okay, we'll get a real short verse, squeeze a short version in here. Artificial sweeteners are artificial chemicals that were never designed by God to be in the human body. Aspartame, which is equal, and all these different things, they're bad. And what happens is we find there's a lot of disease states related to them. Multiple sclerosis seems to be bad. Many of the autoimmune things seems to be affected and triggered by this. We could spend a whole time talking about the different amino acids and methyl alcohol that make this up and how they spend the, I'm getting the wave down that I've got really short time here. Okay, so anyway, they're really bad things that do lots of really bad things, and you don't want to take them as the short term right here. Splenda is another one that is also, it's a chlorinated hydrocarbon. Well, most of your nerve gases and stuff are chlorinated hydrocarbons. There's no naturally occurring chlorinated hydrocarbons that were ever designed to be in the body. So putting these artificial chemicals in is not a good idea. There's a recent study that was showing increased use of the Splenda and stuff directly correlates with increased heart attacks and problems with the heart. As years go by, we just keep seeing more and more studies that correlate these with these. They're not an answer. Stevia, a natural herb, is just an herb if you like the flavor of it. I kind of don't like the flavor of it, but some people like to use it. It's totally safe, no negative problems of any kind I'm aware associated with stevia if you want to use that as a sweetener if you like it. There's a whole nother category of diseases, so I wanted to mention before we close in our last few minutes here, and that is the microvascular diseases. Arteriosclerotic plaque and blood clots is something that takes place in big arteries. Arteries with a muscle wall, a subendothelial area do that. There is another disease process that takes place in capillaries. We call it microvascular disease. Diabetic retinopathy is one example of that. The little capillaries in the retina of the eye start breaking down, leaking fluid, and bit by bit we're losing vision in the eye. The ophthalmologists will go in a laser and try to bzz, bzz, and try to burn off the bad ones and keep them from bleeding and stuff like that, but they keep forming more. The number one cause of blindness in this country is diabetic retinopathy. They also can affect the little teeny capillaries in the glomeruli in a kidney and start breaking down, leaking, non-functioning right. Proteins are leaking through, and what happens when proteins? One of the early signs of kidney dysfunction is what? Finding this microalbumin in the urine, a very common test. Doctors will measure your microalbumin in the urine. What should it be? 0. So if we're seeing microalbumin, we know, okay, something's damaging these. We've got some microvascular disease. So I brought this other picture right here to show you of a picture of microvascular disease. In other words, disease affecting capillaries. This one right here is a healthy glycocalyx in a capillary. Nice layer right here. Everything's flowing through the middle. All the proteins are in here. Nothing's leaking out. This is the way God designed it to run. Here is one with a damaged glycocalyx from hyperglycemia. Look at the surface. How much glycocalyx is there? See, these two are directly proportional. You can see the difference because this mucus layer comes out to about here on this one. Whereas this one, there's nothing there. And so consequently, you don't have this protective barrier. Proteins and things that should never be leaking out are leaking out into the tissue here. And when proteins leak out, they change the osmotic pressure, the osmotic gradient. So what's going to come with the protein? More water and solutes and stuff. And if you look around this picture, see the edema? This is fluid forming around this capillary. Normally, there shouldn't be any right here, see? But see all the fluid forming out there? And of course, as this fluid forms out there, what happens to the capillary? It gets compressed. Yeah, so now we're compressing the capillary. There's not as much room to flow through, so we're affecting our flow here. And we're getting all this stuff leaking out that shouldn't be out here in the tissues. And of course, getting tissue fluid leaking out, whether it's in the peripheral tissues, whether it's in the kidneys or whatever. This right here is actually in cardiac muscle. If you, any pathologists in the room that recognize it? This is cardiac muscle here. And this is the disease process playing on there. So the glycocalyx is absolutely essential for health. Your body's circulatory system is absolutely essential for health. Cells can't live in isolation. They need a continuous supply of oxygen. They need nutrients. They need all of the other things that the blood does going by. And you have to have a good vascular system, good flowing blood to be healthy. And if you're destroying your glycocalyx with hyperglycemia or greasy fried foods or smoking, you are just sending your body in a fast road to major disease processes here. You will end up getting retinopathy. You will end up getting kidney failure. You will end up building atherosclerotic plaques here. You will be at high risk for heart attacks and strokes, and you will end up with hypertension. Again, all of these bad diseases that are killing everybody in our country are tied directly to what we're eating. And what did God's prophet tell us? That she was revealed to her by God, sent his angel to give her this message. What did he say? Have you memorized it yet? Sugar clogs the system. It hinders the working of the living machine. I mean, do you see how the working here was hindered by all this sugar here? This bad, nasty stuff going on here? Yeah. This is the way God designed it to run. And so he sent us the advice. From the light given me, sugar, when largely used, is more injurious than meat. It's the truth of the factor. You know, we live in the time when God says to his people, come out from among them and be separate. You know, we think of that often in terms of that's a message we're to give to people to come out of the other churches, which it is. But he's also asking us to come out from the practices of this world, a peculiar people. And as we reach the end of time more and more, there's another statement, I didn't copy it down here, that says, those preparing for translation will come to the point where they will be subsisting on a diet of fruits, grains, and nuts. And if the only thing we were eating was fruits and grains and nuts, what would our artery glycocalyx look like? What about our liver cells and their carbohydrate metabolism? They wouldn't have all those bad arrows going all those other places there that we drew, right? Yeah. God has a simple plan, and that simple plan is to come back to the Eden diet. Fruits, nuts, vegetables, and grain. The closer we come to that, the closer you come to good health. And we live in the times of Earth's history where God is seriously, urgently asking us to get ready, get ready, get ready. The angels are there saying, get ready, get ready, get ready. It's time to get the tabernacle ready. The day's coming soon when, you know, they go around and put the seal in the mark, you know, and some are going to not get the seal of God. They're not going to get that outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and they're going to be lost. God's saying now is the time to get ready. Now is the time to do everything to prepare our bodies. Remember the chapter in Exodus, or the last couple of chapters there. Built exactly according to all the instructions that God gave, yeah. Built according to all that God said. And then we prepare ourselves for that final preparation. So hopefully these two messages here help us to put a clear, you might say, the insight, the science behind the understanding to understand why God said some of the things he did, why he told us to stay away from desserts and cakes and pies and all that kind of stuff. Why did he ask us to live on fruits and healthy food? Well, now you can understand probably better than any you have before. This is all new material in these lectures, but it's all on the videotape right here, and so they'll prepare these soon, and you get copies of these tapes. If you want, come up with your iPhones afterwards and take pictures of that and some of these other things if you want to share them with your friends and remember them for yourself. But my prayer for you is that, you'll choose wisely, you'll choose to join God's people that are doing everything they can to get ready for his coming, to have a clear, healthy body. We don't have a health message for the world if we haven't adopted it ourselves. If we have hypertension, if we have diabetes, if we have obesity, if we have all of these problems here that are part of the diseases that the world has. When God brought the children out of Israel, out of Egypt, he said, I will put upon you none of the diseases that are upon the Egyptians. I have a whole giant slide program where we go through ancient Egypt, through the hieroglyphics and what we find there, and show what was the diet of ancient Egypt. We find that was high in meat, high in dairy products. They had refined oils. They had a sedentary lifestyle. And you can find in the mummies the fact that they have all the same diseases we have today. And God led his children out of there, and what did he give them? Lots of exercise, lots of fresh air, lots of sunlight, and manna to eat. And they complained, and it's okay, so he gave them some meat, and you remember that story. But God says, no, God has a plan. He's leading out a people, and we can complain and fuss about it and make excuses, or we can enjoy the manna. And the manna today is fruits, nuts, seeds, vegetables, simple, healthy food. The closer we make it to the way God made it, the better it'll be. Okay. I guess it's time for supper.
You want to have prayer?
We'll go ahead and have the blessing for our meal, and then we'll separate to eat. Dear God, we're so thankful that you loved us enough to come to this world and die for us. That you loved us enough to set us an example of how we can live by your power. And we thank you for sending the messages through your prophet to us so that we can know what we need to do to be prepared for your coming, that we can be a part of your new kingdom and enjoy the joys of heaven, eating the perfect diet, living the perfect health there. Bless us now as we go to partake of this food. May it nourish and strengthen us and continue to bless us as we continue to learn the other truths from your word throughout this weekend. Amen.